This is Ben Davidson.
This is Leighton Gray.
This is Tanner Naday.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
This is Jim St. Clair. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. How's everybody's Wednesday going? We got some exciting news on the Cornerstone Forum and our community notes this week. But before we get there, let's talk a little precious metals. They can be thought of as the ultimate insurance policy against economic uncertainty and government incompetence. And with deficit spending and fiscal irresponsibility not ending anytime. I have unlikely in here. It ain't ending anytime soon. Who are we kidding? Now's the time to protect a portion of your hard-earned savings with a form of money that has been recognized for thousands of years. Yes, I'm talking silver and gold. I'm talking silver, gold, bull. They are my go-to for precious metals. With their complete in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, storing, or adding precious metals to your retirement accounts, they have a new feature exclusively for you that allows you to buy Royal Canadian Mint silver coins for the same price as a generic silver round. You're probably wondering, what's the big deal? I tell you who you text. You text or email Graham for all the details. And if you're just buying anything off a silver gold bull, make sure to reference the Shaun Newman podcast. It helps me, it helps them, and it should help you. Caleb Taves, Renegade Acres. They got the community spotlight here on Wednesdays. And let me tell you, the Cornerstone Forum 2025 is heading to Calgary, Alberta. Yes, we're going to have Tom Luongo and Alex Kreiner back. We got Chuck Prodnick back with new features. Kaylin Ford's going to be there. Matt Ehret's going to be there. And Sunday night, we're announcing our next speaker. And I tell you what, we're going to be announcing a few more here as it goes along. It's going to be a similar format to last year, but if you were recalling last year we had 6 speakers and a guest host. Well, we got 2 guest hosts this year already. Chris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Tom Bodrovics from Palisade Gold Radio, and I'm telling you right now there's going to be more than 6 speakers. We've been messing with the format a little bit, and we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to have a little bit of fun May 10th in Calgary, so pay attention. We're going to be announcing the next speaker Sunday night on Substack, and then obviously here, if you just tune in, you're going to hear it Monday morning as well. But head on over to Substack to find out who the next speaker of the Cornerstone Forum is. The Deer and Steer Butchery. If you got an animal and it needs sliced and diced, look no further. I don't know. Is that what they say? I think that's what they say, right? I'm looking around my studio like I'm looking for somebody. Sliced and diced? Is that what we're going to say? We're going to say sliced and diced. Okay. If you're looking for it to be sliced and diced, look no further than the Deer and Steer west side of Lloydminster. And Amber is the butcheress they have there. She is highly decorated in her skills with what she's been doing, and she would love to have your animal come in there. Give her a call, 780-870-8700. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, etc., subscribe, leave a review, give me the, I don't know, is it a thumbs up anymore? Leave me a 5-star review on Spotify. All that stuff really helps. All that stuff truly does help. I don't talk about it near enough, but if you're, you're watching on Twitter or X, give it a share, retweet the thing. All those things help, right? Don't just watch, interact with this sucker, and let's see if we can't continue to grow this thing here through 2024 into 2025. Holy man, we're almost at the end of the year. I can't believe, yeah. The one positive thing is we're getting close to December 21st, and as much as I hate the dark days of being in Canada, December 21st marks the shortest day of the year, that is, which means the days are going to get longer. I can't wait for the days to start, going the opposite way. All right, that's enough rambling for today. Let's get on to that tale of the tape. He's a family doctor and founder of Safe Water Calgary. I'm talking about Dr. Robert Dickson, a.k.a. Dr. Bob. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Bob. Sir, thanks for hopping on.
My absolute pleasure, Shaun. Great to chat with you.
Now, I got thrown your, a video or two of you a while back. Not that long ago, actually, a couple weeks ago. So shout out to Rhett for hooking this up.
Thanks, Rhett.
But I don't know. Maybe people all know who Dr. Bob is. Maybe they don't. Maybe we could just start with a little bit about yourself and then get into, obviously, the Flouride and everything else.
Well, I'm probably more infamous than famous. Dr. Bob or Robert Dickson, born in Tofield, Alberta, beautiful downtown. I say to people, I'm from TO, and they say, oh, Toronto. And I said, no, Tofield. Okay. And I was Well, as my dear past sister, who is a major psychiatrist, used to say, the Dickson males have slower neuronal maturation. So I didn't really start into things till I was 25. Took a degree in what's called kinesiology now, was physical education back in the day. And then that led me into paramedics, a 2-year paramedic program at SAIT. And then at 33 years old, I went back to medicine and became a medical doctor. And at that age, I didn't want to go into a specialty. I thought maybe emergency might be the way I was headed, but that was another 5 years. So I went into 2 years of family medicine residency, became a family doctor, and at 38 years old. So been a licensed practicing doctor in Calgary since then, and retired from my large family practice in Market Mall 11 years ago. I still work 1 day a week in with the same organization in kind of walk-in emergency care, urgent care kind of setting. And then they have a 6-day weekend, which ends today, actually. And then 4 months off in the winter to go somewhere warmer than Calgary. So it's kind of a sweet gig right now. But
I would say a 6-day weekend. Yeah, all right.
Yeah. So as far as my fluoridation activities, I was a pro-fluoridationist. Didn't really give it a lot of thought as a busy family doctor. We have so many things come across our desks. And in 1989 was the first plebiscite in Calgary that actually passed water fluoridation. 4 previous had defeated it narrowly. This one passed it narrowly in 1989. Took them 2 years to build the infrastructure, which has to be quite robust to handle hydrofluorosilicic acid that's scrubbed out of the fertilizer industry stacks to create fluoride for us. And so by 1991, we had fluoride in Calgary water for the first time. Now, you're in Lloydminster, is that correct?
Correct.
Do you have I don't think you have fluoridated water there, do you?
Well, it shows it on the website that it is in Lloyd. I didn't think we did, but it shows it on the website as being there.
I didn't think you did neither, because primarily Red Deer was the first one in 1959 to go fluoridated, and then Edmonton, Grand Prairie, and Lethbridge all around the same time in the later 60s, 1967, around in there, became fluoridated. Medicine Hat never has, and Calgary then didn't until 1991. And so the activists continued pounding away at City Council and the powers that be, and they forced another plebiscite in 1998 in Calgary. And before the plebiscite, they formed an expert committee. Well, I think you know, and I know that, and maybe hopefully most people know it there, that if one forms an expert committee, it depends on who's choosing the expert committee. So if I chose the expert committee, Florida would be to Mars by now with Elon Musk. But I didn't have any role in that, and neither did any of the anti-fluoridationists. It was all pro-fluoridationists that chose the expert panel. So you can imagine what those 5 people were. 4 of them were rabid pro-fluoridationists, and the 5th one was a neutral fluoridation naive statistician. And so they poured over the literature, the science that was given to them by the powers that be, and a few months later they came out with, oh yeah, fluoride safe and effective, except for the one guy. They voted 4-1, and the statistician who voted against it was never seen or heard from again. So they passed it. They put that to City Council. City Council formed a plebiscite and used that as advertising, propaganda. Alberta Health, Alberta Dental Association, Calgary Health, Health Canada, all those organizations supported it and told people they should vote for the safe and effective process called water fluoridation. And on we went. So I don't know.
If I may, Dr. Bob, I just want to slide this in. You were talking about Alberta. So on the fluoride-free Canada, it shows Alberta having 11 communities that have fluoridation: Barrhead, Camrose, Drumheller, Edmonton, Grand Prairie, Hinton, Lethbridge, Lloydminster, Red Deer, St. Albert, and Wetaskiwin.
Yeah. Okay, some of the sort of mid-sized communities then. Yeah. So that makes up about, I think they should say about 42% or 43% is fluoridated in Alberta. Does that sound right?
Here, I'll pull up the map. It says 42.4% of Alberta is fluoridated. And here, maybe I'll do a bit more Canada so people where they're listening from can see where they're at. It says BC at 1.2%, which actually kind of surprises me. Saskatchewan at 39.6%, Manitoba at 69%, Ontario at 71.1%, Quebec at 2.5%, New Brunswick 1.2%, Nova Scotia 46.9%, PEI at 24.2%, Newfoundland at 1.5%, Nunavut at 28.8%, Northwest Territories 64.9, and the Yukon at 0%. So there's all the updated percentages of different provinces of where you live.
Thank you. And there's quite a range there, as you can see. Anywhere
Yes,
from
absolutely.
0 to some higher numbers there. Ontario,
71.1, yeah.
Yeah, that's the highest for sure. And I'll just update Quebec for you. Quebec is now at 99.6% not fluoridated. That's because of the great work of our colleague Gilles Perrant, a naturopath there, and his one of his organizations called Eau Secure, which is a conglomeration of about 300 organizations that fight for clean and safe water and against water fluoridation. So Quebec, by the end of this year, will probably be at 100% not fluoridated. Next to Ontario, which is 71%, and then BC at 98 point, I usually quote 98 point whatever percent not fluoridated in BC. And guess what? Vancouver's kids' teeth are just as good or better. They're actually better than Toronto's kids' teeth. And Toronto's been fluoridated since 1967.
So can we go back? I don't know how. I assume you know the history of putting fluoride in water.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of curious, right? Like it starts. It says on the website, 1945, Grand Rapids, Michigan became the first community in the world to add fluoride to tap water on the premise it would prevent tooth decay. So when you bring up the panel of experts, I'm like, yeah, my panel of experts going to be a lot different than well, I just go always back to COVID, right? If I had my way on my COVID expert panel, or what the government had, we're a little different. It's a little different story. It's kind of like Preston Manning's inquiry versus the National Citizens Inquiry, right? Like they both kind of just feel a little different. So when you look at fluoride in the history of it, can you why did they I get it. The premise is they don't want tooth decay. So were we just having a crazy amount of tooth decay back in the 40s, 30s, 20s? I don't know. And that's why all of a sudden they're like, we got to do something. And that's how they get it past the public, or what was going on?
I like the way you phrase that. That's well thought out. Gives us a lot of aspects there to tackle. It actually started in the early 1900s when dentists in the United States found kids with really brown teeth in Colorado and in Texas. And then they looked at them closer and they went, well, these kids have no cavities. They got brown mottled teeth, but they have no cavities. And so they dug into that and they found that they had high levels of natural calcium fluoride in the water, which the entire Earth has calcium fluoride in the Earth's crust and in the groundwaters. And it's tightly bound. Fluoride is tightly bound to calcium, but it's still dangerous. It's still toxic. And in higher levels, it will really wreak havoc. Those brown teeth are the first signs of actually whole body toxicity. And so these kids are having toxification not only in their teeth, but in their brains and their pineal gland and in other parts of their bodies too. If you look at places in China and India that have high calcium fluoride in their groundwaters, they have younger people that are essentially crippled with skeletal fluorosis. They're bent over, hunched over, they can't walk very well, they can hardly move, and they're not doing very well. And of course, the IQ studies that have come out of China for many years, well, that's a foreign place, they don't do it like we do. Right, they have high calcium fluoride, and they've done the studies, and there's some smart people there, and they've found some pretty major decreases in IQ there. So natural calcium fluoride is not safe. So then around World War I, before the start of World War II, I should say, in the 1930s, the aluminum industry was having a big problem because they were producing a lot of aluminum back in the day, and they were pouring out hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is the waste product from aluminum processing and fertilizer processing. And around these aluminum plants, plants were dying, animals were dying, workers were getting sick, and so they had to find a way to whitewash fluoride. So that was kind of the start of it, in my opinion, where government agencies or businesses got into whitewashing it. World War II was huge. What's that major 3-hour movie that just came out a year or two ago about making the atom bomb? It was
Oppenheimer.
Yeah, Oppenheimer, right. And that one mentioned fluoride a few times in there, or fluorine gas more accurately, because they needed huge amounts of fluorine gas to make the atom bomb. And again, if you're making fluorine gas, you're spewing out some of the waste products and some of the excess. And so it came to be a collusion in the 40s of military, medical, and industrial. So those three powers: medical, industrial, and and military. So they came up with the atom bomb. That was successful. They got their fluorine gas. Then after World War II is when those studies started that you talked about. And it was Newburgh and Kingston, so one fluoridated and one not. And they didn't finish the study. Again, very typical of how pro-fluoridationists operate. They cherry-picked and used that study, just that one study, didn't even finish it, to say that, oh, fluoride is safe and effective for kids. Now, we should backtrack just a little bit. Does the name Edward Bernays ring a bell to you? Bernays? He was the founder of modern-day propaganda. He actually wrote a book called Propaganda in 1929. And he was hired by the cigarette companies, by the tobacco companies, to whitewash smoking. And, well, you probably weren't around in the 30s. Hey?
Yeah, probably not.
I wasn't either. But there's lots of evidence to note that the cigarette companies used Edward Bernays' campaign and propaganda to have doctors sitting in their office in their white coats with a cigarette and telling a pregnant woman that, yes, you should be smoking during your pregnancy because it relaxes you more and helps you through your pregnancy and you'll come out with a healthier baby. That was Edward Bernays. He was so successful with that campaign that the fluoridation industry hired him after, in the 1940s, late 1940s. And sure enough, by 1950, he had letters, thousands of letters going out to doctors and dentists, mostly in the States, some in Canada though. And afterwards, he admitted that that was the easiest program he'd ever had in his entire life, was to convince doctors and dentists that fluoride was safe and effective for kids. And to this day, that propaganda is standing, safe and effective. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it came about.
Well, those words are about as triggering as it gets, safe and effective at this point. So I'm like, all right, fair enough. So
Yeah,
Edward Bernays is hired at, as you talk that story through, I'm like, oh, I have heard this man, because I'm sure I've wrote down propaganda before. I'm sure it's sitting somewhere because I've heard this. And yet so I'm sitting there. All right. So you got this World War II going on. You got, we're trying to build the A-bomb, et cetera, et cetera. You got these products that they can't get rid of, are causing a lot of problems, health problems. And they're like, well, how can we take something bad and turn it into something good? Oh,
exactly.
We'll put it in people's drinking water. It'll make their teeth white. I don't know. I don't even know. Does it make the teeth white? I don't know.
No,
this
it
is
doesn't.
where I don't
makes
know.
Makes them brown. So the problem is
Fluoride makes the teeth brown?
Well,
this is going back to your Colorado thing.
If you have too much of it. So what hydrofluorosilicic acid pumped into so that comes straight out of the fertilizer stacks in Florida, China, Mexico. None of it's cleaned in any of those countries. It comes into holding tanks because it's scrubbed out of the stacks because it's not allowed in the air, in the ground, or in any of the rivers, lakes, streams, or oceans. Not allowed anywhere by strict law. So they have to put it in these holding tanks, and then they developed this way to convince people in communities it was good and safe and effective for water fluoridation.
I'm going to stop you for 1 second. I want to make sure my brain heard all of that correct. It's not pretty much allowed anywhere in the world, right? Like
95.
You just said, we got to put it in holding tanks because it can't go in lakes, rivers, streams, ponds, ground, air, oceans. And yet they convinced us monkeys that putting it in our drinking water was a smart thing. I just want to make sure I heard that correct.
Instead of them having to dispose of it in plants like our Swan Hills plant up north, that costs a huge amount of money to correctly dispose of toxins. So they'd have to pay a lot of money per ton to dispose of that, or they sell it to us, put it in our city water, and get paid for it, and you and I get to dispose of it in our bodies. Isn't that a great end around, eh?
You're making me want to start drinking something different real fast. Okay, carry on with this.
Yeah. So, okay, where do we go from there? So it's not a good concept. Oh, the other thing.
Well, no, you're talking about China. You were talking about. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt because I know I get people's. I interrupt where their brain is going. You were talking about China and them taking all of the toxins and putting it into these holding tanks. And
so it is just the hydrofluorosilicic acid mainly that comes out. That's the main byproduct. But it comes along. If you're drilling and you're crushing up rocks for fertilizer, for phosphate fertilizer, or you're smelting aluminum or whatever, there's other smaller entities that come along, like lead, like arsenic, like mercury, strontium, bromium, cadmium, trace elements, but that's not cleaned out. If you brush your teeth with fluoride, it's going to be sodium fluoride. That's cleaned, that's purified, that's regulated, that's monitored. None of the stuff that comes into our drinking water is clean or purified or monitored. So that in itself should be just a major alarm bell. And I'm going to segue quickly into something else because if you put it in your water, you can't control dose or dosage. You drink 10 glasses, I drink one, you get 10 times the dose. No control. Oh, good people, we're lowering the concentration. We're controlling the concentration at 0.7 parts per million. That has nothing to do with dose or dosage. Any medical person will tell you that, and a lot of lay people can too. You drink 10, I drink one, you're getting 10 times the dose. And if you put it in water, if you try to medicate with water, what happens? Well, we drink maybe one, at most 5%. Let's even give them 10%. So 90% of water goes back out into our rivers, lakes, and streams unchecked with the rest of the hydrofluorosilicic acid that we didn't sequester in our bodies. It goes into nature, into the environment unchecked. The environmentalists should be raging about this.
So why aren't they?
Because they don't know, because we're not allowed to educate, because we're not allowed by the press to put anything. They don't put anything anti-fluoride ever. For the last 5 or 6 years, we haven't had a thing in the press because they've been told by the powers that be that control the purse strings, you shall not ever report anything anti-fluoridation. And so they don't. They can do some pro-fluoridation stuff. They can talk about, Calgary's restarting their fluoridation program or whatever. That's fine. But I can't report on the science against it, on the brain damage in kids.
They're gonna have a real hard time as Donald Trump gets in and RFK Jr. is walking around talking about shutting down fluoridation in the water. I mean, it's gonna be pretty hard not to notice that.
Yes, exactly. And that's a good point. And now we at Safe Water Calgary, Fluoride Free Canada, which I chair as well, with the Fluoride Action Network in the States that I'm active member of, we're trying not to go with the politics of it. And we're trying to let that kind of run its course. But like you say, it is out there big time.
You take the politics out of it. One of the biggest names is gonna get a platform in the United States of America.
It's got it already.
Right. And he's already talking about it. So they could act like we're not going to talk about this issue, but this issue is going to get talked about. It's going to get talked about a lot.
You know that Kennedy was appointed so far as head of HHS, Human and Health Services in the States, the biggest health organization going.
Yes.
So heads are going to roll, believe me.
Well, I mean, it's just you think you can not talk about things. Okay, sure, have fun with that world. That world's dying real fast.
Well, the old guard is going down. But, Shaun, they are talking about it. They're talking about it in a big way. They're yelling and screaming and kicking and saying that, yeah, well, those studies are faulty and the judge didn't know what he's doing in California when he made that ruling. We should probably talk about that.
Sure. Let's bring up California. Yeah, please do.
So it was actually federal court in California, and it was Judge Edward Chen, and we just won a 7-year lawsuit. And Judge Chen just came up with his pronouncement, with his writings on the trial, his findings on September 24th of this year, so just a month and a half ago or whatever. And so we won that after 7 years against the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the States. And that's a precedent setter. That's the biggest case they've ever lost. They hardly ever lose. So we won that, and they said, Judge Chen said that, yes, it is a neurotoxin, and that's EPA has to do something about it. Now, he didn't have the power to stop fluoridation for over 200 million Americans, and neither does RFK. As much as I love the guy, he doesn't have the power to do that. And he's been a bit more nuanced lately, and he said, well, on January 20th, I'm going to start the process of ending water fluoridation, and that he will do. He'll send out to all the water organizations, all the waterworks systems, all the communities, municipalities, to California that has mandated many years ago to fluoridate every city above 5,000 people. And there's several other states that have mandatory water fluoridation laws too. So he'll send out to all those people, all those organizations, that there's good evidence now that fluoride is neurotoxic, brain damaging for our fetuses, babies, and kids, and that we just shouldn't be doing this anymore. So we won that court case, and that is a really big feather in our caps. That's a big stick for us to wield. But also this year, we've won several other things too. to go in chronological order, the last thing was the Cochrane collaboration. Are you familiar with the Cochrane collaboration? It's the gold standard of medical evaluation. So everybody medical and dental would know about that. The public knows a lot less about it. But they've been evaluating for decades all new medical technologies, treatments, public health, that sort of thing. And it's pretty much an unbiased collection around the world of top experts, scientists, doctors, researchers. And so in 2015, they came out with an evaluation of pro-fluoridation, and they said, well, folks, there's nothing here. There's like 19 studies that are possibly partly worthwhile. They're not even good studies, but they're sort of worthwhile. And only 3 of them have been done since 1975. So they said, well, toothpaste, if you want to do it topically. And then Cochrane just came out with another review last month in October. And it's basically said there's no efficacy, there's no effectiveness of water fluoridation. At the very most, 4%. And 4% is teeny tiny. The pro-fluoridation is said for decades now, 25% decrease in cavities. Well, okay, there's 25% right there, half. Yeah, 25%. 25% sounds pretty good, doesn't it? We're reasonably good. We're reducing something by 25%. But that equates, if you crunch the numbers, to half to 1 cavity a lifetime. So we kind of gave them that numbers. There's lots of studies to refute that, but we kind of gave them that as their jumping off point. But now these new studies, like the Cochrane collaboration report, shows 0 to 4%. So just this tiny little 0 to 4%, which is virtually nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the Lotus study out of England, which was earlier this year, 2024, 6.4 million participants, and that showed 0 to 3%. And they said, probably closer to 0, but we can't crunch it down that much. But 0 to 3%. Well, give them 3%. That's nothing. I mean, are you going to spend millions of dollars and handle this volatile product that if it's built in your office, it'll eat through your concrete there, through your desk, through your microphone, and you'd have to get people in hazmat suits in there to clean it up? Are you going to put that in their public water and toxify kids' brains, toxify your and my pineal glands? Do you know about the pineal gland in the back of the brain?
I certainly know a little bit about it.
Yeah, the seat of the soul, our connection with higher powers, with intuitive things. It calcifies hydrofluorosilicic acid.
When you say it calcifies, what do you mean?
It just deposits calcification. It'd be like maybe rust in a radiator or something like that. It just calcifies it. It deposits calcium around it, and then eventually it doesn't work very well. And if you have too much, it doesn't work at all. So we'll kind of be zombie-like and clunker.
I hate to go too tinfoil hat here, but I mean, at the same time, I'm like, okay, I've listened to too many people. I've had too many people on this side. I've read too many bloody books, and where you realize what happens after World War II and the people that come over and are coming over during World War II and et cetera, et cetera. And now you're talking about calcifying the pineal gland, and I'm going, okay. There's no way they didn't know that was going to happen.
Oh, they've done that for decades.
Right. Okay.
Decades.
So you're pulling up a book. What book do you got? The Case Against Flouride.
The best book ever written about fluoridation, and it's by my good friend, Dr. James Beck, over here. And another dear friend, he's from Calgary. He was one of my mentors at the University of Calgary Medical School, PhD and MD out of the States. I may as well tell you this segue too. And anyway, Paul Conant, who's PhD, head of Fluoride Action Network, and Dr. Meckling, who's now passed out of England. And anyway, excellent book written in 2010. It was a big part of a part of us getting Calgary Council to stop fluoridation in 2011. And where was I going to go with that?
Well, I guess I just want to finish my thought on you, Dr. Bob. I'm like, okay. So one of the things that when I get into this discussion, and even I'll just put it on a younger Shaun, right? I go, I've been drinking town water, city water for forever. I'm fine. What's the big deal?
Just think how smart you'd be if you hadn't done that, though. Shaun, people like you and me will never know. It's the people that, if you put it on the bell curve of IQ, so there's a certain number of people at the bottom end of that bell curve that are mentally challenged, that we have to take care of in society, that we have to assist, that we pay money for, whatever.
Sure.
And at the other end of that bell curve, there's a small percentage of people that are brilliant, are geniuses, kind of lead our society, or way showers, whatever. They're people that we need more of, really. So if you take even a 3 IQ point loss, societally, population-wise, you're going to shift that bell curve, and you're going to shift it to a point that there's 50% more of the mentally challenged folks and 50% less of the geniuses we really need. I mean, that can really crater a society. It can have a major effect. You and I might not miss 3 or 5 IQ points. I'm sure I've done away with more than that in my wayward youth, but the kids do. And this affects fetuses because it crosses the placental barrier. It affects minds and the IQ because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to protect us, and fetuses in the placental barrier as well. It's supposed to protect us from all these toxins and these things that damage us.
How long have you been working on this?
Only, what time is it now? 25 years.
25 years.
Yeah.
Over 25 years, I assume you've had a lot of time to contemplate this.
And a lot of time I've tried not to.
Well, I just look at it and I go, okay, so do people just write it off, like the health experts, the environmentalists, right? Like do they just write it off? Oh, it's like it's inner water and nobody's dropping dead right beside me, and so they just don't see it. It's kind of like this slow, gradual thing. It's kind of, I don't know, this COVID thing in a different shape and form.
We are monitoring all those studies. We are monitoring, but never do anything about them. It's just as for instance, we're down in Lethbridge presented for Lethbridge City Council about 10 years ago. And they brought in some pretty heavy hitters. They brought medical officers of health from all over Alberta to testify against Dr. Beck and myself. We were the only two anti-fluoridationists presented to City Council during that entire day. They brought in the chief dental officer from Health Canada, and he was a real flaky guy that flew around the world promoting asbestos, selling Canadian asbestos to other companies when we knew how much harm it was doing. Anyway, he comes into Lethbridge and he's interviewed by City Press, and he went, "You guys have been fluoridated since 1967, and I don't see a single person walking around here with horns, so it must be okay." This is the chief dental officer of Canada. Sigh. So, I guess we could mention that.
Well, I guess I was waiting. Like, to me, so they fly around and they go, nobody's got horns.
Yeah.
But you're like, but hey, moron, that's what we're not talking about. We're not talking about horns. We're talking about the slow deterioration, and you have to pay attention in order to see it.
Bioaccumulation, which is a slow process, Shaun, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, if we're talking about politicians and city councils, we also presented in front of Red Deer a few years back, and the mayor was avidly pro-fluoride, and he was on his way out maybe in a few months or a year, and he wanted to have water fluoridation as his legacy. He'd just helped the poor kids, and he'd got water fluoridation solidified there. And so he set up this process, a day-long process, again, presenting in front of council, Dr. Beck and I for the first 2 hours in the morning, and then the medical officer of health from Edmonton for 2 hours after us, and then a lunch break. And then we did the same thing in the afternoon. Now, a fair process would flip those around, because if you present after somebody, you can counteract or
Sure.
Correct some of the mistakes that they might have made. So this medical officer of health, very bright guy from Edmonton, he presented after us. And at that time, the Harvard meta-analysis had just come out showing studies from all around the world. So that would be China and Mexico and a few in Canada and the United States, but it's showing brain damage. And if you look at these plot points on a graph, there's a standard deviation. And I don't think there's any point in explaining standard deviation here, but you've got the midpoint there. You're either causing harms or you're causing good things, and most of the things were towards the harm side. And so there was 0.4 standard deviations towards harm. And that equated to, if you break that down and crunch the numbers, that's 7 IQ points in fluoridated cities. So that's not just in North America, that's also in China, but they do some pretty good work there too. Pro-fluoridationists deny that, but they do. So in his last presentation part in the morning, he mentioned that, well, those pro-fluoridationists who mentioned that study to you in the morning and said 7 IQ points, that's not right. It's 0.4. See, it's right here. It's 0.4 standard deviations. It's 0.4 IQ points. So that's negligible. We shouldn't even be talking about that. And then we went for lunch break. And so I went and printed off the study form with that graph showing the 0.4 standard deviation. And I said to him, well, you understand this, don't you? Like, you're a doctor, you're a scientist, you're a researcher. You understand that this 0.4 deviation is not IQ, but the IQ drop that comes out of that is 7 IQ points. And he went, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. And I said, so you're going to correct that in the afternoon, right? And he says, yes, I'll try to do that. And that's where we left it at. We just trusted that he'd do that because, he made an honest mistake, and I don't think it was honest, but anyway, he's going to try to correct that. So we give our presentation for 2 hours. He gives his presentation for 2 hours. Nothing about his major mistake in the morning, which would have won the day for us. I mean, that's major. 7 IQ points is huge, economically, academically, whichever way you want to look at it, that's huge. And also now we're finding tripling of ADHD, which we didn't know back then. But anyway, so we lost. We lost resoundingly. The vote was something like 8-4, 7-4, something like that. We lost. And Flouride is still in Red Deer's water. And so I've been called out by the CPSA, the Physicians Association of Alberta that monitors us. So the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta. And so I've been taken to tribunal with them for 6 years now. It'll be 6 years in January. They've been trying to take my license away for my advocacy and my leadership in anti-fluoridation and water safety. And so part of the things I've been called out is maybe being a bit of a loose cannon and maybe not being as tactful as I could be. And so I had actually called that medical officer of health a liar. And I probably could have framed that a little better. I could have stated the facts like I just did to you, and been a little more
tactful.
Thank
Yes.
you. Tactful. Tactful would be the word. But anyway, it wasn't. And so that's one of the many pages of charges they brought up on me. So we're in the process of sorting that out now. We have major 5-day tribunal and the court set up for the last week of January. I'm heading to Mexico in 8 days, and so I'm going to have to fly back from Mexico to meet with my lawyers at Bennett Jones downtown here and prepare for that court case, and then have the 5 days in court at the end of January. So we're in the process now of maybe trying to renegotiate that with all the big wins we've had here lately. So we'll see where that plays out. Been fairly stressful the last 6 years, I must say. And another thing that I didn't mention that we got for ammunition this year is the NTP. Have you heard of the National Toxicology Program report out of the U.S.?
Yes.
So most of your people would know, because that's a big one. The NTP is a kind of a conglomeration of the alphabet organizations in the States, like the CDC and the EPA and the FDA, but it's mainly housed in HHS, Human and Health Services. And so they were tasked with a whole group of doctors and scientists and researchers to look at the whole fluoridation issue in 2016. It took them 4 years. They poured through thousands of studies. They went through all the animal studies as well as the human studies, threw out all the bad ones, but they went through thousands of studies, literally. They came out with a draft report in 2020. And that's when our first major court sitting was in this 7-year court case I was talking about in federal court in the U.S. as well. And but it was only a draft report, and no one had seen it. Because HHS and NASA, one of their sub-bodies, was staffed with pro-fluoridationists, forced the NTP to go back and redo the report. Said, "Oh, this is too strong." They did give the highest level of brain toxification to fluoridation in that report that they could, and so they made them go back and redo it. And then a year later, NASA made them go back and redo it again. That's unprecedented to have a major organization that spent 4 years. Credible organization having to go back and redo the report, and it was always pressure to quash it, to slow it down, to water it down, so to speak, pardon the pun, and to make this report less forceful. And so finally in 2022, the judge had been waiting for that NTP full report, like for the report to be released to the public, and it wasn't. So we forced him to go to court, and we actually got that report released to the judge and to both sides, the plaintiffs and to the EPA. And so we had the draft report, but it still wasn't released to the public. So it wasn't until 2023 that the judge actually had another sitting, 2 weeks of court, and that report came out, and many other reports, and lots of FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act, entities that came out that showed incredible collusion and real nasty things happening behind the scenes with the EPA, the CDC, the FDA in the States, and the HHS. And they were quashing that report. They were keeping it down. So it wasn't until August of this year that we finally got it released to the public. The judge had it, but he wanted the final report, the cleaned up final report released to the public. And that was done in late August of this year. So just a couple, 3 months ago. So the judge finally had that, and then that enabled him to finish writing his judgment, which came out, as I mentioned, on September 24th, a month later. So yeah, we have all those big things. We have other studies that are showing exactly the same thing with lack of efficacy, like the Cochrane collaboration report, like the Lotus study. There's 3 or 4 other studies that show the same. There's just a plethora of wins that we've had this year that really stack the science in our favor against what the other side, what the pro-fluoridationists have.
Does it come back just to money then? Like when
Yeah.
you look at it, it's just big industry. You mentioned earlier that military, medical, and industrial all teamed back up way back when,
Yeah.
and you think of those 3 in particular, and I hear money, money, big money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you go, this is big money to them, so they don't want to lose their, I don't know, cash cow almost, right? Like they're getting
Yeah.
paid for waste. They're going to go from making a ton of money to now having to dispose of it, which is
Yeah.
going to cost them big money.
Exactly. And like, Shaun runs the world. I mean, money power. So if you just peel one more layer back from that, yes, the fertilizer industry in Florida, they can't produce enough fluoride to fluoridate 71% of the United States, and some of Canada too. So they get it from China. But they make about $250 million a year, give or take, on that fluoride product. Instead of paying for it to be disposed, getting money by selling it to us, that's about $250 million a year worth to them. Well, that's not it sounds like a lot, but it's not that much in the whole realm of things. But you peel that layer back further, and that goes to Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Colgate, those sort of organizations that make fluoride products. And so
Pfizer makes, what do you mean by that? Colgate makes sense to me. Why would Pfizer be making?
All the bigs make fluoride products. It's a real lucrative industry. They make the gels, the foams, the rinses, the sealants, all those things that the dentists use and that some people use. Some of it's off the shelf. A lot of it's still prescription. But the dentists use that. Like a dentist can make a 6-figure salary by fluoridating your and my teeth. And they don't even have to see you. Just the hygienist does it. And off you go. So those products are worth about $20-some billion a year. Let's say $25 billion for a rough number. And so that's the main concern of those bigs, of big pharma, the big industry, that they would lose. They wouldn't directly lose that. If water fluoridation goes down, what happens to their sale of products that emblazon fluoride all over them, like toothpaste and gels and foams? People go, oh, well, if it's toxic in our water, isn't it toxic to put in my mouth? So the sales of that would drop markedly. I don't know if it would disappear. I don't think so. But the sales would drop maybe, I don't know, half. So it'd be a huge hit to those big pharmaceutical industries. So that's your follow the money trail.
In toothpaste, what does fluoride do?
I'm not a dentist, but what it does is kind of replaces the calcium hydroxide with fluoroapatite, and it strengthens the tooth. It makes it stronger. Now, if you look at that, or if you just listen to that, it sounds okay. And it also decreases some of the bacteria in the mouth that cause cavities. But it's a fairly infrequent thing. Water fluoridation has a very low concentration, and so it just swishes through your mouth, and most people don't drink much water during the day, so that has very little effect on the topical part of the tooth. But the activity is mostly topical, so it makes the tooth stronger. Now, do you necessarily want your pipe stronger? Or do you want it a bit more pliable? Do you want to hit that sweet spot where it's not too soft, not too strong, and bends and flexes and doesn't break easily? You make things too strong, they're more brittle, and they're easier to break. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's what happens to teeth too. If you put too much fluoride on, it makes them, you get fluorosis, those first signs of like white streaks and then yellow and then brown mottling that I spoke about earlier. And we should touch on that one a bit more too. But you get too much fluoride in the system, it hardens the teeth. And after a long time of chewing and biting and doing things with your teeth maybe you shouldn't, your teeth will break. And if you look at, here's a fact that should just wipe fluoride right off the map. Kentucky and Louisiana, the two most fluoridated states in the U.S., 98, 99% fluoridated. They have the highest edentulous rate, which means loss of teeth. So the highest fluoridated states have the highest loss of teeth. They get brittle, they break, they have to have them pulled, they get their implants and their dentures and such. The lowest fluoridated state in the U.S., Hawaii, has, guess what? The lowest edentulous rate, the lowest loss of teeth. Shouldn't that right there say to you that fluoride is not working for our adults and seniors?
It should, but then I've been through the last several years, and I mean, like, the most obvious answer doesn't seem to be the one that gets followed. So,
Would that mean the lack of common sense? Common sense is not that common?
correct. Yeah, well, and I mean, it just, you're talking about big money. And so, somehow I'm sitting here just thinking about myself. I'm criticizing nobody else, folks, but myself, right? Because I remember getting asked about this question like 2 years ago, maybe less. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have enough bandwidth to deal with it. Everything is everything,
Who do you trust anymore? Who do you listen to?
Well, I mean, right?
Who's putting the facts out?
It's like absolutely everything's trying to kill us by the sounds of it, right?
Yeah.
Or trying to dumb us down, or trying to this and that. And when you get talking to people, you're like, does nobody do their job? Does nobody just stare at it and go like, okay, so we're doing this here and that's what's happening. We're not doing it over there and that's what's happening. Why wouldn't common sense win out? And the obvious answer is, well, big money, industrialization, all these different tiers are making sure it doesn't.
And we've been ingrained in this system for so long. And so to the credit of doctors to check off safe and effective, by the way, those are the ones that are paying my huge legal bills at Bennett Jones downtown, because it's the Canadian Medical Protective Association paying for my case there for the last 6 years. So that's been nice to not have to forge out all the checks for that. So it's just ingrained in our system. Safe and effective. If you repeat it often enough, long enough, people believe it. And if the controllers of our medical systems, the Health Canada, PFAC, the Alberta Medical Association, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, the Calgary Health Region, if they will repeat safe and effective often enough, doctors like me in 1998 voted for it and believed it. But if you look at the information, you're not going to believe it. Unless you just look at the pro-fluoridation information, which is not a good way to study science. You have to look at both sides. And if you look at both sides, we've got a lot more science than they do.
I was curious, okay, so you're talking drinking water coming from the tap. Like, when it comes to bottled water, anything like that, does this issue follow suit or not? It's only in tap water.
Yeah, a bit of both. So bottled water is usually, unless it's in the States, they've added fluoride to some of the bottled water in the States, but bottled water is taken out of our reservoirs and our wells for pennies by the Nestle's and the Bigs. And then they reverse osmosis it, clean it, usually remineralize it a bit, and then sell it for hundreds of times what they paid for it. I mean, it's a big scam. I can remember driving through Utah with a friend a couple of years ago, and we stopped to get gas, and he was pumping in the gas at a fairly cheap price at that time. And I went in to buy a bottle of water, and then I came out and looked at it. There was 1 liter of water there, and then I figured out it was about twice the price of gasoline. The bottle of water was higher priced than gasoline. Well, that's a great scam. I mean, that's been huge for like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Nestle's and those folks that make the bottled water. They made a huge amount of money on that. So most bottled water in Canada does not have fluoride, and but all the the processed foods and packaged foods and things that are shaved off chicken bones, and teas concentrate fluoride. There's so many things out there that have fluoride in them. They spray a lot of the vegetables to keep them from ripening as they transport them with sulfonal fluoride. It just goes on and on. Like, fluoride is ubiquitous. So it's in a lot of things already in our society. And then if we put hydrofluorosilicic acid on top of that, it really whacks the system. It really puts you over the top. So hydrofluorosilicic acid, or fluoride, in our city waters or our town waters is the biggest contributor to our fluoride load. But all these other things help along. They take us over the top. So we don't need fluoride now. We got it in the toothpaste. It's topical. It does not one single thing for body function. Fluoride is not necessary. I'm trying to talk Elon into taking it all to Mars now. If we took all the fluoride to Mars, we'd have a much healthier planet and population. We do not need fluoride. It's not a vitamin. It's not a mineral. It's not. It's a medicine. And the pro-fluoridationists often don't admit it's a medicine.
I guess the first thing I would tell people to do is go to fluoridefreecanada.ca. That seems to be a wealth of information. But assuming, they go to anyone on listen to this, goes, takes a look and realizes, holy crap, my community has it. Didn't realize that. Or my community's on the chopping block or maybe up next to get it.
Like Regina.
What would you say to people? Like what can they do? On and on. Because if people are concerned about, I know people are concerned about this. This is why it keeps getting sent to me. What would you tell people? Like, where can they go? What can they do? What avenues? I mean, you talk about all the big wins, Bob, but like, where would you go? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it, Shaun? Where does the rubber hit the road? So I'll use Regina as an example. I presented in front of Regina Council about 3 years ago, I'm thinking, on this issue, because they were thinking of refluoridating, and they were going to have to rebuild their infrastructure. And we were kind of holding our own there, but one of the old councillors, he was just pounding, beating the drum on water fluoridation. And he had all the talking points from the American Fluoridation Society and all the pro-fluoridationists, and he was really hard to deal with. And he finally trapped me on when I said the point about the bigs that were profiting from this. I went Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Colgate. And he goes, Pfizer's the one that saved my life. They gave me 3 vaccinations. They saved my life from COVID. If you're putting down Pfizer, that's the end of the story right there. And we lost that. We lost that vote in Regina. So they've gone ahead and have voted to restart fluoridation, but they've delayed it because of infrastructure and some other problems till now I think it's 2027. And so they just had an election there 2 or 3 days ago in Regina.
Yeah.
Election. And I worked quite closely with the 3 groups there. And I think that they did quite a good job there. I think it looks like they got 5 councillors out of the 10 who are open-minded and willing to look at or relook at water fluoridation. And so they're in a better position to stop it than we are here in Calgary. We lost the vote in 2021, the plebiscite, and Calgary Council restarted it in 2022 with $10 million of our taxpayers' money to Waterworks. Waterworks said they'd have it done in 2023. They came back in 2023 last summer and said, supply chain and infrastructure and all these problems. We need an extra $18 million. So that didn't even go to City Council for the $18 million. They just signed it to them out of the slush fund, out of the rainy day fund. Didn't even vote on it. Gave Waterworks an extra $18 million and said, thank you. We'll have this done by 2024. And then, of course, earlier this year, they went, supply chain, infrastructure, blah, blah. We're not going to have this done until Q1, so the first quarter of 2025. So that's where we stand in Calgary. So we're only like 2 or 3 months away from restarting water fluoridation that we ended in 2011 without a vote of the public, without a plebiscite. Regina has that extra 2 or 3 years to work with, and they could definitely put the brakes on it with the new information that's coming out.
What are their I'm just curious. Like, what are their talking points that get like that sells this as being a great idea?
Shaun, it's helping the poor kids, don't you know? We're saving the poor kids with this quarter of a cavity a lifetime. Jeez.
That's the talking point. Is poor kids?
That's it. They've now tried to extrapolate that, particularly some of the people that are more politicians and don't know the science. They're trying to say, well, it's good for adults and it's good for seniors too. Well, from what I just told you, did it sound like it was good for seniors? It does nothing for adults or seniors. It's not needed, as I said, for a single body function. So it's
You
the
might
poor
as well.
kids.
But if I mean, if I follow money, when we talk about getting internet out to rural communities, right?
Mhm.
Billions of dollars to get it there, or you could go smarter and get Starlink. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, if
Mhm.
you're just doing dollars and cents, you go, why wouldn't you just do Starlink? Makes
Right.
sense. I'm sure there can be issues down that road too, but you look at dollars and cents. And to help the poor kids, I don't know, just give them some toothpaste. Wouldn't that be smart? Wouldn't that be cost
Education,
effective?
education, dental care. The very poorest in Alberta do have covered dental care, but a lot of them don't know how to access it neither. And the main thing, Shaun, is you can't outprescribe diet. Let me read you the quote from this beautiful poster we sent out, this mail out we sent out to 410,000 Calgary homes before the plebiscite in 2021. So there's me on the end there. I got this backwards here. It comes up backwards on my screen. There's me on this end.
Yeah.
And there we go. And there is Jennifer Fountain. That's Rhett's lovely wife who lives now in your neck of the woods. And this is Richard Donaldson, a economist and financial planner from Calgary that put the case out for it being totally uneconomical to mass medicate via the water. And Jennifer Alexander, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago and was very mentally distressed by pro-fluoridation and pro-COVID vaccines. And then this is Dr. Craig Young at the end. He is the most knowledgeable dentist on water fluoridation in Canada, now that Dr. Hardy Linebeck has retired as the head of preventative dentistry at the University of Toronto and was totally anti-fluoride. So Craig, the day after we delivered this flyer with science on the back and lots of organizations that support it to 410,000 Calgary homes, the day after Dr. Craig Young, the dentist, was taken out, the Alberta College of Dentistry phoned him and said, you will dissociate from Safe Water Calgary right now, or you lose your license and you lose your livelihood as a dentist. So if you look on our website on Safe Water Calgary, safewatercalgary.com is my website. Fluoridation Free Canada is our national website that I chair. But if you look at our website, we have this brochure, and there's a blank white space where Craig is. There's no dentist there. There's just a blank white space there because we had to take Craig off our safewatercalgary.com website. So that's how they play. That's how they roll. Completely nasty. No, you shall never speak your mind. You shall never have free speech. You shall never have the ability to educate the public.
You know, the thing that's going to win me over to your side faster than anything is when they come down on people that quick. I mean, it's like, oh, you got plenty to hide, right? Like,
Exactly.
I mean,
and that's the same with the College of Physicians and Surgeons for the last 6 years. I mean, that case has been bouncing back through the courts and through the tribunals at the college, and they could have ended it. They did end it in February of 2019. They charged me in January of 2019, ended it in February of 2019, saying that this case does not have merit, and so they dismissed it. And then it was appealed in March of 2019, and it's been raging ever since. So that's 6 years. It'd be 6 years in January. And they try to take people down rather than dispute the science. So where does that leave us?
I don't know. Honestly, I'm like, I probably have some listeners that are like, it's taken Shaun a long time to get to fluoridation. And it probably has.
Mm-hmm.
At times, I'm like, I don't know if I can handle much more of this, right? It's just another thing where you're like, why can't we just have a little bit of common sense? It just shocks me, actually, because in one instance, you're saying fluoride isn't all bad, but the way it's being put through certainly is. Especially
Topically,
when
fluoride's okay.
yeah,
that's your choice.
You're talking toothpaste, correct?
Yeah.
When you say topically,
or gels and foams and rinses.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
We can debate those, but those are choice. Those are freedoms, Shaun. Putting fluoride in the water as a medicine is not a freedom. It's taking away the rights, and particularly the rights of the poorest and the most disadvantaged, because it's those people that can't afford to buy bottled water or to buy a $10,000 reverse osmosis whole house system or to buy a $500 or $800 Berkey to sit on the counter and take the fluoride out for 2 or 3 months before you have to replace the fluoride filter. It's the poor and the disadvantaged that are affected the most. It's babies, children, the disadvantaged, the poor, and people of color that are affected the most by water fluoridation. And if you don't believe the people of color thing, just go to LULAC. LULAC is the League of United Latin American Citizens in the United States. Huge organization. Go to their website and look at what they have to say about water fluoridation. It affects people of color more, and they want to get rid of it.
When you say people of color more, wouldn't that be affecting the the poor, right? Like aren't
Absolutely.
they? I mean, like they're higher probability to be in
Higher
that group of
percentage
people.
of the poor. Yeah, they're the most disadvantaged usually. And
I mean, that's changing over time.
It is.
But certainly, when you say the poor, the downtrodden, they fall into that category a lot. I mean, there's every ethnicity in that category. But when you're pointing to the United States of America that had slavery and everything else, that's why it comes up. Correct?
Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe
exactly. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. So we're purporting.
Sorry, in Canada, I'm curious. First Nations, like, do they just are they like government get out of here, or are they fluorinated as well?
Most of them are not fluoridated, but most of them don't have safe drinking water, so they don't drink the water. And that is a crime against humanity. It's a crime against our native brethren. They should be the first ones to be put on the list. Instead of putting fluoride in the water and spending millions and millions of dollars a year to do that, put safe water, get safe water for our Indigenous folks. I mean, that's the least we could do to them or for them. I mean, everybody, having safe water is an international right, and most of our Indigenous people do not have safe water. That's a crime. Don't put fluoride in it. It's just another toxin. Oh, and one point I'll bring up that I was going to segue to earlier is that putting fluoride in is, it's just so wasteful and so harmful. So, like, why would you ever bother doing it to the poorest? I mean, it just doesn't work for them. So why not do programs, spend that money for things like Child Smile, the Scottish Child Smile program, which they piloted in 2001 and then ran out around most of their country, because they started with 3-year-old kids in Scotland and said, we're going to teach you about teeth and about gums and about mouth and mouth health. And then they would take that back home and take it to their parents, and their parents would start feeding them better food, and they get more nutrients and more vitamins, and take care of their teeth better, brush their teeth more, and drink more water. And they didn't fluoridate in Scotland, and that Child Smile program was just hugely successful.
Well, I find this interesting. So unfluoridated, I can't even say the word, unfluoridated countries. There we go. So here's the countries that don't have any fluoride in their water. Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Netherlands, Japan, Italy, Iceland. Here's the country, and now I assume there's more. I'm assuming that's not the only ones. Here's 95. The big ones that do. Australia at 80%, Canada at 38%, New Zealand at 61%, United States at 64%, and England at 11%. Now, Ireland's 100%, and it says Spain at 11%. Here's what sticks out to me about those stats on the countries that are fluoridating. That's the Five Eyes countries.
Mm-hmm.
And you start digging into those, like, I don't like doing the tinfoil hat thing, but it just keeps presenting itself. Australia, 80%. United States, 64%. What is it doing? Mm-hmm. It's hurting your population. Why are no other countries doing that? That doesn't make sense.
Well, just to crunch those numbers down a little easier for the folks, it's 95% of the world is not fluoridated. So we in Calgary have been accused of being the what would you call it? The laggards, I guess, the people that aren't in the know. We're not coming up to modern times. Well, 95% of it is not fluoridated. As I mentioned, over 99% of Quebec, 98% of BC, 97% of Europe, which is what you were, the numbers, the countries you were talking about there. That's 97% of Europe is not fluoridated. Not, folks. And their teeth are not falling out in the streets.
Yeah, we can all make fun of the English's teeth all we want.
Yeah.
That's
And
probably the only one.
they're trying to push fluoridation across all of England right now, but these studies are going to show up, and especially the Lotus study I mentioned earlier out of England earlier this year. 6.4 million people, no effect for fluoridation. So let's go somewhere else, folks. Let's do something that actually works. And if you look at the fluoridated countries, 2/3 of the United States are fluoridated, and that's more than all the other 24 countries that are fluoridated in the world combined. So it's United States. So if RFK takes down the United States, it's going to have a big ripple effect through the rest
Yeah,
of the world.
100%. If you don't mind, can we go back? Okay, I want to go back to Edward Bernays. You mentioned he wrote a book on propaganda. Cigarette companies first hired him. And then you mentioned he went to Flouride. Who was it? Like who? I don't know if there's a who. I don't know if you know the names or if it was industry or what. Who were the people that hired him? Was that the aluminum factories that said we need you to change the thought process on this, or was it something different than that? Was it the dentist event? Who is hiring him to sell this idea?
It was a conglomeration, as I mentioned before. Dr. Hodge was one of the main ones, and Dr. Dean, Tremley Dean. And you can see some old on our websites, like on Safe Water Calgary and Flouride Free Canada and Flouride Action Network. You can find some old videos of these people and of some of the people that fought against them too, but many of the people that promoted it. And there'd be these 2-second grainy videos of them going on the chalkboard, fluoride and 10%, 25% less cavities. And
I've seen that. I had a DVD of it given to me. I was watching it before this interview. I was like, this is fascinating, right? Like I would have written so much stuff 5 years ago. Now I'm like, oh man, this is starting to make a little bit more sense. So apologies, Dr. Hodge, Dr. Dean, carry on.
Yeah. So, it was just that conglomeration of industry and military and then convincing doctors and dentists in the medical field. And they just ran with it. And anybody like Dr. Hill, for instance, Doug Hill was a doc in Calgary in the late 1950s, early 60s. And he fought vociferously against water fluoridation because there's already lots of information coming out on increased cancers, on fluorosis, on other damages to the thyroid. And so he fought really long and hard, and they just took him down. Like eventually he just retired in the early 60s and went, I've had it. They've whacked me too much. But he was quite successful in the years that he was running and putting out his good information against water fluoridation. So it's been going on for a lot of years. Like I mentioned, there was 4 plebiscites in the 60s and 70s in Calgary. I actually won $100 off a dentist, and he said, no, Calgary's been fluoridated in the 60s and 70s. And I went, no, it started in 1991. And he said, well, my father was a dentist back in that time, and he told me we had water fluoridation. And so I bet him $100, and we both delved through the information, and I proved to him.
Where did you find it, Dr. Bob? Where did you go to find out when your city started getting fluoridation?
That's going through the various archives, and that one was primarily the City of Calgary archives, because they document the four plebiscites that we won. Well, I shouldn't say we won, I wasn't around them, but the anti-fluoridationists won in the 60s and 70s, and then the first one that the pro-fluoridationists won by like 52 to 48% in 1989 to create the first water fluoridation in Calgary in 1991. And then that next one that I outlined to you, that they had the expert panel in 1998. So that makes, 6? So it's 4-2 for the anti-fluoridationists, and because they won the 1998 one, and then they won the 2021 plebiscite as well. So it's 4-3. We're still winning, but the 3 recent ones.
How many people vote in that?
Well, okay, good question. Yeah, I like that. Because, so people that generally vote for something like that are the more educated people that have been maybe propagandized by Alberta Health Services, by medical associations, by dental associations, by their own dentists, whatever. It was a 3-page vote that we had in Calgary, and the water fluoridation question was buried right at the bottom of the first page. So a lot of people missed it to start with, because it was just all this blah, 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 vote, 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 vote. And then there's this little water fluoridation thing. And then you flip over to the next page to the mayor and the councillors and whatever. And so a lot of people missed it, unfortunately. So 62. We lost big. I thought it was going to be close, but we lost 62 to 38%. Now, if you crunch the numbers down, oh, and by the way, that 62 or whatever percent has been used by all of the councillors since then to say, well, I'm actually against water fluoridation, but my constituents voted for it, 62 to 38%, so I'm voting for it. But if you crunch the numbers down, and again, this is democracy. We have a problem, I think, with democracy here. But in a democratic society, if 62% of the voters that voted for it vote for fluoridation, that equates down to about 14% of all Calgarians. So 14% of all Calgarians are saying the other 86% will be fluoridated with something that comes out of the waste stacks of a chemistry or fertilizer industry and is not purified, and it causes incredible harms, which we're realizing more and more and more over time. So that 14% is toxifying the other 86%. And you should not be voting. That's why we were against plebiscites. You should not be voting for, I shouldn't be voting for whether you should be medicated, Shaun, and you shouldn't be voting for whether I should be medicated, or your neighbors, or your friends, or the rest of your town, or the rest of the country or city or whatever. It's just not a good way.
And not to mention, they would have nothing but access to probably funding, not to mention media, not to mention on and on and on. And you pointed out early on this that nobody's really giving you the time of day to come and share your thoughts. I'm sure there have been some lovely people before me. I don't mean to say that I'm something special. I'm not. Just that in our world, if you speak certain things, certain mainstream outlets aren't going to touch you with a 10-foot pole, maybe even then some. So you've got the deck stacked against you, is what you have.
Totally. It's more than David versus Goliath, and they're definitely the Goliath. But the thing is, we've whacked Goliath with a pretty big stone right in the middle of the head here this last year. And so Goliath is staggering around quite a bit right now and just might go.
Well, any final thoughts before I let you out of here? I've appreciated you hopping on, and I appreciate Rhett hooking us up to do this. But before I let you out of here, I don't want to skip over anything. If you want to make sure a different piece of information gets passed along to the audience.
Well, kudos first to Rhett and Jen. I just really like those folks. They're great people, very bright. I think you should twist Rhett's arm, get him into politics. The ethics. So I'm being pursued mainly by the head ethics person, not aesthetics, that's a different thing, ethics person at the University of Calgary. I mean, it could be both, I guess. But anyway, the head ethics person at the University of Calgary Medical School. And it's so unethical to mass medicate, especially when you're not controlling dose and dosage, as we talked about before. And then you're not monitoring, you're not getting informed consent, and you're not following up. So highly unethical. So that should be another thing that stops it. Doesn't make good economic sense. There's just so many things. But the main thing is that we're toxifying the brains of our fetuses, babies, toddlers, children, kids. And that is just so wrong. It's now proven. Anywhere between 1 is the very lowest that I've seen, and up to 15 points if you're in a fluoridated community where the pregnant woman is drinking fluoridated water, you can lose up to 15 IQ points. Well, that's huge. Lead was taken out of our system by showing it was 1% effect on a total population level. 1%. And that's where the term "get the lead out" comes from. Get the lead out. Well, it took us 7 decades to do that. It's so sad. So
if you take the fluoride out, poof, it's gone tomorrow.
That's
will you see noticeable? I mean, I don't know, not notice. I call it noticeable effects, but like the body's a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah.
If you remove the toxic, what happens?
That's the next thing I was segueing to, Shaun. Exactly. You read my mind. So as I mentioned to the National Citizen Inquiry that I testified in front of a month ago, the question was, are children safe in Canada? Well, children aren't safe if 38 or 40% of our citizens are being fluoridated. Our kids are being fluoridated. Our pregnant women are being fluoridated. They're not safe. And, it's going to take decades to get the glyphosate out of our systems and out of our lands. But to get fluoride out, you either say no if you don't have it, or if you do have it, like in your town, you go to your city councilors, you develop groups that talk to me and to Fluoride Action Network in New York, and we'll help you get it out. And you have the councilors say, this is not a good thing. Look at all this science. Let's turn it off the taps. So they go and turn off the taps. And in a day or two, it's out of the system. No one's drinking it anymore. And then your body can take care of the slow detoxification, or you can go to a naturopath and get some detoxification supplements and whatever. Do IV detoxification, whatever you want to do. But in a day or two, it's out of the system. It doesn't leach the lead out of your pipes anymore. It doesn't leach the lead out of solders. It doesn't rust and make your pipes more caustic. It's gone. It's gone out of your water system. It's gone out of your human system, except for what's already in there. And again, we can slowly either detoxify that or just sequester it away in a safer place.
When you talk about it being calcified, I forget how you put it, around the pineal gland, if you remove fluoride from your body, right, and you slowly detoxify, will that naturally go away, or is that something that buildup you have to do something about differently?
Yeah, you probably have to use a little bit of rust removers, as our analogy went. So there's lots of information on the internet now. If you'll look for detoxification of the pineal, you can do it medically. You can do it at home. You can do it kind of more mentally or spiritually. So there's several ways to detoxify it slowly. But the thing is, you're not keeping toxifying it by continuing fluoridation. So my message would be, for the kids at least, let's get rid of it. For the women that it detoxifies their thyroids, get rid of it. For the people that makes their bones thicker, get rid of it. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't do any good. It's not needed. And let's put it where it belongs, in the Museum of Failed Medical Practices.
Well, it's fun. I appreciate you hopping on. Somewhere my father is driving around, and he's been laughing this entire time because he's going, Dr. Bob. Every time I say it, all he's thinking of is the Muppets. And I should have brought it up right at the start, but I'm like, here we are at the end. If you don't get that reference, obviously you didn't tune into the Muppets for forever.
I can explain it quickly for you, Shaun. That's how I went into medicine at a later age. As I mentioned, I didn't go until I was 33. I used to love the Muppet Show. It was one of my favorite because their humor was so good. And there was Dr. Bob, who was Ralph, the dog that played the piano, but he also stood in as Dr. Bob in Veterans Hospital. Yes. And he'd do hokey things, like he'd talk to Nurse Jane there when they had a patient on the table, and he'd say, Nurse Jane, why is this patient here? And Nurse Jane would say, well, I think the patient's homesick. And Dr. Bob would say, he can't be homesick, he's here sick. And so I went, well, if Dr. Bob can be a doctor, so can I. So there it is. That's the reason why I went into medicine.
Well, shout out to my sister-in-law, Becky. She's a vet here in town, and my dad's called her Dr. Bob since she became part of our family. And so anyways, I just chuckle about the whole Dr. Bob thing. Somewhere Dad is driving, and he's having a good chuckle today. Dr. Bob, thanks for hopping on the podcast.
Thank you, Shaun. That's a wonderful interview. You're very good at what you do.